I was born with spina bifida. It affected my spine to the point where my spine grew through a hole in my back and cut the spinal cord off. And so that's why I can't move my legs. So because of that, I ended up having to learn things in a different way, which actually you might not say it was a different way because I didn't know the other way. I'm not perfect. I still have those moments where I think I can't, but then I usually am able to turn it around by asking myself, how can I? And that question opens up all possibilities that you could ever have in the world. So when you ask that, you really can accomplish anything by figuring out those possibilities and figuring out your own possibilities.
Hello and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Linda Ulrich, and here at the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, we are talking to some amazing people in the world who are changing the world with ideas and innovations and fresh ways at looking at old problems. And today we're going to talk to a really special man. Enock Glidden was born with spina bifida, and he has not had the use of his legs for his whole life. He's had to learn to do things differently. Well, with the use of adaptive equipment and the help from friends and family, he has become an avid skier, a rock climber, a hiker. He also participates in sports like basketball and tennis and paragliding and skydiving. And all of that recently culminated in a 5-day ascent of El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. Because of these experiences, he has made it his life's mission to speak to everyone and anyone who'll listen about never saying I can't, and instead always asking, how can I? Enock is a blogger, and he now travels the world doing consulting work to make the amazing outdoor world and the spaces there available to everyone by improving access to what otherwise people might miss out on. So I am so excited to talk to Enock. He's now on a mission to get people of all abilities outdoors in Maine and beyond throughout the world. So welcome, Enock Glidden.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is an amazing opportunity. I'm really excited to get to talk to you.
I tell you, we had a great free call where we just kind of polished up what I might ask about so that I could, get us into what is so important that you're bringing to the world. And I just was walking on air after our conversation. So
Me
thank
too.
you so much. I can't imagine how you must make audiences feel. Because, in my observation through a long life and in working with people in the healthcare field for 30 years, all of us have something that we're saying I can't to. We live with some limiting beliefs that make us less able. So talk to us right off about this notion of disability.
Well, first, I'm not perfect. I still have those moments where I think I can't, but then I usually am able to turn it around by asking myself that question, how can I? And really that question opens up all possibilities that you could ever have in the world. So when you ask that, you really can accomplish anything by figuring out those possibilities and figuring out your own possibilities. And I think that's really what I do is figure out my own possibilities. And that really came from being born with a disability. I was born with spina bifida, and this also happens to be um, Spina Bifida Awareness Month, which is really cool.
Yay!
And so spina bifida is actually called a snowflake condition, and that's because it affects everyone who has it in much different ways. And so there are 3 different types of spina bifida. I don't know, I can't remember the other 2, but I happen to have myelomeningocele, it's called. And that happens to be I guess you could say the worst one because it affected my spine to the point where my spine grew through a hole in my back and cut the spinal cord off. And so that's why I can't move my legs. And so because of that, I ended up having to learn things in a different way, which actually you might not say it was a different way because I didn't know the other way. But for most people, it would be a different way. I just happen to do things my way.
I think I've shared with people on this podcast. I have a sister-in-law. My husband and I started dating when we were 14 years old, or even earlier. And he has a sister with quite severe cerebral palsy. And I never knew anybody with any kind of disability until I met and grew up with Nancy. And that is one of the points that I remember realizing when I was quite young, that if you never knew what it was like to not be just who you are, it changes your perspective significantly. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with friends who have disabilities and who got their disability later on in life, and I do think it's probably easier to be born with a disability than it is to be given a disability later on in life, because now you're literally having to start over from scratch and learn everything you've already learned in a different way. But for me, I was learning the way everyone else does when they're born. I was just learning my way, and I think that probably is a much easier way to go about it.
Well, it just brought me to a new understanding of this word disability too. I'm sure you've lived through. I don't know how old you are, Enoch, but I'm sure you've lived through many transitions of political correctness on even talking about this subject, right?
Yeah, so I'm 46, and actually I have this conversation sometimes when I'm talking to people about disability etiquette and how language is a big part of etiquette, and treating people the way you want to be treated, and addressing them the way they want to be addressed is a big part of language. And so in my lifetime, the word for disability has changed 3 times. So it used to be handicapped, and then it became disabled, and now we use people first language, which is I'm not a paraplegic man, but I'm a man with paraplegia. And so that is the standard for today, but it could change again. Who knows? But for me, all those words mean the same thing because that's how I grew up hearing them and knowing them. So you may find someone with a disability who isn't offended by those words because that's how they understand them.
Right. Well, I wanted everyone to know that you and I had this part of the conversation in our pre-call because I wanted to use the words that you're comfortable with, and so we're going to refer to this as a disability. But I know that will be different for different people. But I'm just wanting to be just as good as I can be about sensitivity and all that stuff. So okay, so let's get to the heart of things here. This how can I question. I'm sorry. When I first heard you say that, I was like, that is so fundamental, so simple. I just felt like, wow, we think of 1,000 ways to tell our kids to try harder or to think bigger or to have more confidence, and we never just pose those simple 3 words to them. How could you do it?
Yeah, when I started speaking, I was mostly speaking about myself and about how I climbed out Capitan and I did all these things, and it became a speech of I did this and I did this and I did this, and I really didn't want to talk like that to people. I wanted to give them something to take away. And so I started thinking about my life, and I realized I had been asking myself that question my whole life without actually knowing that I was asking the question. I was coming up with ways to do things, but I wasn't coming up with excuses to not do them. So I remember there's a speaking of hiking, there's a good story about me asking that question one time when I was playing in my parents' driveway, and I saw that we lived in the woods in northern Maine, so there was a lot of woods around my house, and I saw this perfect dirt ramp off the edge of the driveway, and I thought, I wonder if I could get into the woods down that ramp and then see how far I could go. And so I pulled a wheelie and launched into the woods, and I started pushing myself, and then I came to a pile of debris and couldn't get around it, so I hopped out of my wheelchair and crawled and just started pulling my wheelchair behind me. And that was one of the first times I think I had really answered that question of how can I do this? And I didn't tell my mother where I was going either, which was probably a bad idea, but she never found out. I don't think that I actually did that. So I turned around and made my way back, and everything worked out fine. But I think, yeah, really, that was the first time I I really remember answering that question.
It's just a light bulb moment. I'm not sure I won't be changed forever by just meeting you and having you tell me that. Because we all are facing all kinds of challenges in life, and whether it's a physical challenge or an emotional challenge, um, we can say I can't, or we can say how can I. I just love this fresh approach, and it is so fundamental. But we can make it that a mantra. So, okay, so part of the equation here was your wonderful mother. You have great parents. I love your parents' stories. So please tell us about your parents because they are part of this story. They sound like they had exactly the right sort of personas to nurture somebody as positive and hopeful and helpful as you.
As a person with a disability who was born in a small town, I was the only kid in a wheelchair, and I was really the only person who used a wheelchair that I knew of. So having a mother who was born with retinitis pigmentosa and ended up losing her eyesight, that she was my mentor as a person with a disability. And so I got to see her do quilting, and she made baskets, and she was president of the women's club and president of the Helping Hands organization in town, and she was involved in the co-op and church groups, and she did all these things, and for the most part couldn't really see. She even drove until I was 13 and then decided that was probably not going to be a good idea anymore. So she gave it up, but she really showed me that a person with a disability can do anything if they find a way to do it. And I think she really was my first mentor as that type of person. And then my
And then
dad, of course, yeah,
yeah, your dad,
yeah,
he lived by that. How can we?
yeah. So
Right?
my dad got me involved in a lot of things, literally from a baby. So there's a picture of me I have with him on the back of a motorcycle, and I'm in a backpack on his back, and we're just riding the motorcycle with him, with me strapped to his back. But then as I got bigger, he got a car seat to go on the back. And then I got even bigger and he bought a sidecar. So I never stopped riding the motorcycle with him. He always found a way to keep that going. And then he would take me hunting and fishing and all the things that dads do with their kids. And there really was no question that I was not going to do those things.
Hmm. Yeah, and I do have to say, my husband's family was the same way with his sister. They refused to give her driver's ed at the high school, and they found a way. It was a how can I environment, and I think that's number one. This fresh idea that you're bringing to spaces. I'm sure you probably do public speaking and consulting that opens up whole new landscapes that people haven't even considered.
Yeah, over the past 4 years, I've been working with land trusts and various land managers to make outdoor spaces more accessible. And I always find that when the employees of these organizations go out with me on trails, there's a lot of aha moments where they see things that they didn't realize were obstacles for people, or they see it. I sometimes will take a different path because I can't get through on a certain trail, and then I'll realize, well, going that way would have been better for the trail. And so there's all these little things they get to see that they wouldn't necessarily get to see if they weren't out there with me. And it sort of teaches them that sometimes a certain path might not work, but you can always find a different path.
Well, and I think there's something you have this wonderful way. I'm scrolling through my notes where you're not asking us to pave the forest. You got this really lovely thing that you say about accessibility.
So I think everyone deserves choices, just like everyone else in the world. And so I don't necessarily advocate for perfectly accessible trails because not everyone wants a perfect path. We do need them, definitely, but we only need them where a lot of people go. We don't necessarily need them in the middle of the wilderness or up a mountain or where people are normally going to be challenged anyway. But people like tourist attractions or different places on the coast of Maine and things like that are where we do need those places, because if thousands of people are going there, then everyone should be able to go there. And so I advocate for improving access, but not necessarily making it perfect, because I honestly I don't like accessible trails. They're kind of boring, and so I like a bit of a challenge. And so I like the trails that are still doable, but not necessarily accessible.
Right. So, and isn't that the same for all of us?
Right,
If it was just a walk in the park, we'd go to the park.
right.
We're wanting to have a little bit of stress and a little bit of strain and have some intellectual challenges about how to get over this or do that. So it just offers that same kind of stimulation and challenge to everyone. So I love your attitude there. Also, because I think people often get overwhelmed and, they think they immediately shoot to the edge of the universe with what has to be done. But you have a great rap about just taking things in stages too.
Yeah, when I'm advocating for different improvements on trails, I like to show people the little things they can do to make a big difference. So if you start doing a lot of little things, eventually it becomes a big thing. And you can pick away at things. You don't necessarily have to go to the ADA standard immediately, because first of all, that's very costly, and it can turn a few $1,000s into $100,000. So if you just start picking away at maybe removing rocks, or covering up some roots, or widening the trail, or laying down a different surface, or putting a few benches, you can do any one of those things and just do that one thing this year. And the next year, do the next thing. And eventually you have a really improved access trail. And so that's really what I try to stress to people is you don't need to go 0 to 100. You can go 0 to 10
Mm.
and then do another 10 and another 10.
Mm, that's lovely. Okay, we're going to take a break, and we come back. We're going to talk some more about so many things with Enoch. You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time or maybe even the emotional stamina to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So, if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, it's really simple. First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So, subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel, and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness. Okay, we're back with Enock Glidden, outdoor sportsman, managed a 5-day climb of El Capitan, even though he has spina bifida and the things that come along with that. Talk to us about what you see in this world of adaptive sports and how sort of everybody wins in that world.
So my adaptive sports world really, or career really started when I was in junior high. I met my phys ed teacher, Bob Dyer, and he really opened my eyes to what was possible. And so on the first day that I met Bob, he walked up to me and he didn't say hi, didn't say how are you. He said, "Can you do 20 push-ups in your wheelchair?" And so I said, "Well, I can do 40." And I don't think I'd ever done one push-up at that point, but I pulled it off. And he didn't really treat me differently after that. He treated me like all the other kids, and he pushed me to try things and took me skiing for a week a year here in actually where I live now. And he got me into wheelchair racing, and I joined a basketball team and did all these things that all the other kids were doing. And that's really what started to open up my world. I started meeting people like me, and I started seeing that people with disabilities could have a life like anybody else. And so I met all these people playing basketball, and they were driving cars and had families and had houses and did all these things that everyone does. And it was because of adaptive sports that I got to see all that. And so now I actually work for Maine Adaptive here in Maine, and Maine Adaptive Sports and Recreation is the full name. And I've been skiing with them since I was 13, thanks to Bob. And now it's come full circle, and I'm on the staff and helping other people enjoy those experiences.
Well, and that's the part I was getting at is that I of course I interview folks all over the world who are, taking something that they have a passion for and sharing it with people of all abilities. You in Maine there have another a gal, you knew her name. She takes surfing very seriously. Um, and she helps folks with adaptive surfing. You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, so there's a adaptive surf organization here in Maine. I can't remember what it's called now off the top of my head, but yeah, I actually was on a TV show with the same episode, and it was called Borealis. And so there is actually quite a few adaptive organizations here in Maine. Maine Adaptive, there's Adaptive Outdoor Education Center, um, Central Maine Adaptive, and the Surf organization too. And so it's all these different experiences and different organizations that can open up people's world by showing them that they can do things. And I think that's really what adaptive sports does. It creates that spark. It shows you, well, I can do this thing, so well, maybe I can do this thing and then this thing. And now you're doing everything. And and I think that's really what it does. It sets you on a path.
Well, and what I noticed, and that is how I learned about your work. It was, I think it was a PBS
Yep.
version of Borealis,
Yep.
where maybe Willem Lang, he's that extraordinary host,
Yep.
outdoor host. Yeah,
Yep.
I think Willem's got to be 90,
Yeah.
still hiking and climbing and paddling and. And yeah, I think he featured you and that. And what I remember noticing was the pure joy and wonder of the volunteers that were there to help to just be a part of this, like you said, this expanding somebody else's landscape. It I don't know, it just changed me, and I immediately set about trying to contact you.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I do for Maine Adaptive is try to get more volunteers so we can get more people to enjoy these experiences. And I think you do. You see it when you go to any one of our programs. Everyone is having a good time. The volunteers, the students, even the staff, because it's all enjoyable. You get to see people's reactions, and you get to see that they're now enjoying the thing you enjoy. And I think it creates connections, it creates community, and it just creates a world where everyone is on the same playing field, and they're on the same level, and they're all doing the same thing. And I once heard someone say, when I'm on the rock wall, no one knows I have a disability because I'm just a climber. And I think that's really what it does. It just creates that moment where you don't you it's not about your disability anymore. It's about what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And people succeed in groups is always something that I'm reminded of. Through all of human history, we've succeeded in groups. And there's something fundamental in here when you're part of a group that has a challenge. We might as well talk about that.
Yeah.
Like, what did it take to climb El Capitan? Like, talk to me about that. There must have been a group and the synergy and the energy. Oh, I just got goosebumps again thinking about it. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, community has been a big part of my life from that small town of 900 people all the way up to climbing El Capitan, which took 15 people to pull off. So there was 12 people that carried me to the base, and they just kept taking turns in a carrying me in a rescue litter for about 4 hours, which it was only about a quarter of a mile, but it was a really hard quarter of a mile. And so then I had 2 guys that climbed with me, Craig Martelak and Christian Cattell, and Christian would, lead, and he would set ropes that I could, do pull-ups on, and then Craig would come from behind, and he was there in case I needed help, or he was also filming it, so there's a film about it, and then he would also, clean all the gear that, Christian was using to be able to climb ahead. And so I was doing about 800 pull-ups a day while I was on Capitan, and so it was about
Wow.
4,000 total. It was
You
a
must have tremendous upper body strength.
yeah, I lived in California for 3 months right before I did it, doing an
Yeah.
internship, and so I was practicing in a gym 3 or 4 days a week, and,
Hmm.
um, right before I went, I was doing about 300 feet an hour in the gym, so I was pretty dialed in by the time I got there.
Okay, that goes back to this advantage disadvantage thing, right? Um, I mean, you probably discovered stuff about yourself that you didn't know.
Oh, definitely. Like, uh, so on Capitan, I was climbing a route that they describe as overhung, so that means it was, angled out away from the rock. So that we chose that route because then I would be hanging away from the rock and I wouldn't be rubbing on the rock while I was climbing.
Okay.
But that also meant every day I'd have to slide off the portal ledge that we were sleeping on and get lowered out into space, and I that was probably the scariest part of every day was just waiting to be able to say that I was all hanging straight and I could start climbing because most of the time I was 40 to 50 feet away from the rock and just out in midair, 1,000 feet in the air. And so that was
Doing
definitely,
pull-ups, just
yeah, just
totally.
doing pull-ups. And
Oh my god.
so to overcome that fear, that's what I did. I just concentrated on the next pull-up and just stared at the rope and just said, next one.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there's so many questions here. So first of all, if people want to see some film of this, what will they go to?
So it's not on YouTube anymore, but I do have a trailer on my website,
Okay,
and if they come see me speak, I usually will
yeah,
play it at one
and
of
share.
my.
We're going to share it at the end too,
Yep,
but share your website right now.
yep. It's just enochglidden.com.
Okay,
Yeah.
Enock.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So then over 5 days, which means you didn't go up and down every night. You were like there, glued to the side of the cliff face
Yep.
overnight in some kind of a hanging tent.
It's basically just a fabric platform that,
Oh
essentially
God.
with a metal frame, and we were tied into the rock while we were sleeping. But I always made the other guy sleep on the outside. There was no way I was sleeping near the edge. So
I
I
can't
slept with
even
my back
imagine.
on the rock.
Oh my gosh. Okay. And then you're somehow cooking dinner? I mean,
Yeah, we
what
had a little jet boil, and we basically ate well, first couple days, we ate really well because we had cheese and chocolate and
yeah.
bagels, but we had to eat all that stuff fast before it went bad. So the last 3 days were just, add water to dried food and get through it.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. So many times in your life, here's another little statement that I'm going to repeat forever. You said it must have been like, well, that worked. What else can I do?
Yeah. So after El Capitan, well, actually before El Capitan, I I had the idea to climb Mount Rainier, and so I'm still working on that one. I'm also working on hand cycling across the Grand Canyon. Um, so yeah, I have a lot of ideas. Yeah.
That is just so, well, okay, it's just you're a force, Enoch, and it's a force that we could all introduce in our own lives in some way, depending on our own challenges. So back to making the outdoors accessible. This one hit me right between the eyes too. You're a master of simplicity. Okay, you said, let's face it, we're all going to need these trails eventually. If you live long enough, you're going to have a trail that accommodates whatever challenges you have, right? If you live long enough, we're all going to need these trails.
Yeah,
That is
I think
such an aha moment as well.
yeah, I think the statistic is 80% of people will eventually have at least a temporary disability. And so literally almost everyone is going to need this type of access to the outdoors at some point in their life. And that's really what I tell people when I'm advocating for these trails is that you may not see it now, but eventually you may need this because you are an outdoors person and you're always going to want access to the outdoors. And so having these trails is going to allow you that access at any point in your life. So really everyone's going to need them.
Can you give us more examples of this? Yesterday I did an interview about artificial intelligence and using AI in our lives. Now, I know you have a tech background.
Yep.
Didn't you go to Vermont Technical College for
Yep.
an engineering, or tell me
Yeah,
about
I
that?
did a rehab engineering degree there, and then I got my computer information degree at University of Maine at Augusta.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes when we're way out there on a topic we know nothing about, which arguably most of us would be in this moment listening to you, give us yesterday when I was doing that interview, I thought, okay, well, I did teach myself how to use AI in some really hilarious, sort of funny applications, just playing around with it. And then I got more and more curious and careful. So give us some more stories of other people you've known who've had this how can I attitude, or when it's applied that we all can relate to.
So I used to actually Bob Dyer bought me a subscription to Sports and Spokes magazine when I was younger, and he there was a lot of people in that magazine because it's geared toward people with disabilities who are in sports. And so I would read a lot about people not really asking that question deliberately, but definitely answering that question. And so Mark Wellman actually was the first person to climb on Capitan who was paralyzed. And he did that in 1989. And that's always stuck with me, that picture of him hanging from that rope and just out in the midair like I was, and I think that was one of the big impressions that it left on me was, well, if he did that, then I definitely can do anything. And then I met Mark Wellman right before I climbed El Capitan, which was really cool. And I've actually met a lot of people that I read about in that magazine in the last 10 years. So it's been really cool to just meet some of my childhood heroes like Craig Blanchett, who it was a wheelchair racer that I used to read about, and he raced for Nike and all these big companies, and he was world renowned, and he was in the Olympics and all kinds of things. And I've met a lot of Paralympic athletes and all of these people, and literally they're just answering that question of how can I, and but they're answering it to a level that is way higher than most people ever could dream of, and so that it really gives you someone to look up to in a sense of wow, I really can achieve major things.
Yeah. And that leads me to this great concept that you and I talked about saying yes to more things. That's a whole nother part of the equation too, right? You have this great recent example of that. Didn't you say
Yeah,
yes to something that was going to take some time and you weren't going to get paid for it? And, who knows what could tell us
yeah,
that story because I think it's a great reminder.
yeah. I recently said that I needed to start saying no because I'm quite busy, but I do. I say yes to everything because yes always leads to something else. And so I did a webinar for an organization called American Trails, and I did it for free, but there was about 4,000 people that watched it, and apparently people are still watching it today. So it, it ended up getting me an opportunity to go to South Korea, which I'm doing at the end of this month. And just from doing that one webinar, and now I get to go to South Korea and talk at the Asia Trails Conference, which is pretty major. And so I've never traveled overseas, which is another big thing. The furthest outside of the U.S. I think has been Canada. Um, so really, saying yes will always lead to something else.
Yeah, it just I thank you for reminding us of that too. Of course, there's the busyness part of that equation, but I'm frequently surprised at the guests that I asked to be on the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, and I'm chatting with astronauts and people that have fed others 2 billion meals, hungry children, 2 billion meals. And yet they're like, no, thanks. And I'm thinking, whoa, wait a minute. And I think it was good for you to remind me of that, because there's a lot of areas in our life when, to take the time to chat with a teenager. We might think that those few moments would be wasted, but you never know what might land that you might have to offer
Yeah,
a
in
teen.
fact, that's one of my favorite things to do is talk with kids.
Okay, talk to us about the kid thing, because
Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right.
yeah. Kids are my favorite audience because they're not afraid or embarrassed to ask anything. And when I talk, I say, "This is a judgment-free zone. Ask me anything you want, and I will answer it." And I literally do. I've answered, "How do you go to the bathroom?" I've answered lots of embarrassing questions that people would not answer, but it's because I want kids to realize that the only way to get to learn things is to ask things and get the answers, and not to be afraid of people, and not to be afraid of being curious and looking for those answers, because they I think it makes them more comfortable around people with disabilities. And if we can do that, then we'll have a much more open world and a much more embracing world and an inclusive world, because people will stop being afraid of each other, and they'll start talking to each other, and they'll start learning from each other. And that's really the goal, is to just have them learn and have them be more comfortable in just talking to people.
You've probably overheard a kid asking a question about you to their mom, and the mom shushing them.
Yeah, yeah, that actually happens a lot. And I'll be in the grocery store or just anywhere out, and I'll hear some kid behind me say, "Why is that guy in a wheelchair?" And almost always the parent will say, either shush them, or they'll try to quiet them down in some way, and I always just turn around and to start talking. It bothers me when they shut the kid down, because they're telling that kid, "Don't ever ask questions." And that's not the way they're going to learn, and that's not how they're going to get through life. And so I just start talking to them, and I give them the answer. I tell them, um, depending on the age, if they're really young, I'll just say that I hurt my back and now my brain can't tell my legs to work. Or um, if they're older, I'll explain the whole thing. And I'll just tell them, don't ever be afraid to ask questions, because that's how you're going to learn.
And there's this other part to that equation that I think we should just go ahead and talk about. It's when people will use the wrong word. Okay, so let's say there's some language around race or age or disability or anything, and we might be offended by it. You and I both talked about how, I was a dentist for 30 years in a man's profession, that there were only 5 or 6 women in my class. So I got used to this. My husband as a dentist too. I got used to this constant for all my entire life. We would be introduced and people would say to my husband, "Oh, is she your assistant?" to me.
Yeah.
And ay, ay, ay.
Cringe.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yay. And I had to get over that, because you just can't carry around that much ill will ready to hatch or launch on the world at all times. And I had to come up with this notion about trying to assess their intention. So
Yeah,
talk to us about intention and
yeah.
language.
So I've been out on. I can think of one moment right off the top of my head. I was out on a trail and there was an older woman, and her immediate response was, "Oh, it's so good to see you out," as if people with disabilities don't go out. And so, but yes, it was cringy, and yes, it gave me a gut reaction. But I also had to think about, well, what is that woman's background? Did she grow up in a place where people with disabilities weren't allowed to be in society? It wasn't that long ago that people with disabilities were put in institutions and kept from society and hidden away. So she may never have seen a person with a disability on a trail before. And so she's just reacting to what she's seeing. And I think we sometimes we need to take a deep breath and think about a person's reaction and why they're reacting that way, because it may not be for really bad reasons. It may just be that's their lived experience. Another thing I can think of is when someone offers to help me. Some people I know with disabilities get offended by that because it's sort of them saying that we are helpless potentially, or that we need help because we have a disability, but not necessarily knowing us or knowing what we're capable of. And I think some people get offended by that because it diminishes what people see you as being capable of. And so I have this response. I'll say, no, I have a routine, is usually what I say. But there's no reason to jump down someone's throat about it, because the next person might need that help. And if you yell at someone, or you're mean, or just have a really sharp response with someone, you might prevent them from asking someone if they need help ever again. And the next person might have needed that help. So I try not to have a gut reaction with people, because of that lived experience, and because I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know their background. I don't know why they're asking me that. I just know that they're trying to be helpful. They're not trying to be offensive. And so saying I have a routine just lets them know that I'm good.
Yeah. I love that. And that's a great thing that we all should remember for our next trip out in the world, where we want to offer help, but we don't know if we should, and all that complexity. I have to say, and I would love to get your reaction on this. The one thing I learned, I broke my leg so badly. I broke my kneecap into 7 pieces 3 winters ago.
Wow.
And so I had to have a cast all the way from my groin to my ankle for 4 months. It was a nightmare. It's lucky I can walk again. But anyway, I was immediately in the little carts at the grocery store or Walmart or whatever, and I had never seen the world from that vantage point, and I thought of myself as a pretty thoughtful, capable, kind person. But boy, when you're actually I would see my patients in the stores, and they would be looking down at me, some with a sense of pity.
Yep.
That was the hard one for me. I could
Yeah.
boy, if they said, "Oh my gosh, Dr. Linda," and would hug me, "I heard this happened. It's worse than I thought," right? And blah, blah, blah. That person was fine and dandy. But the people that would look down on me, and they definitely had an outward sense of pity. Oh man, that was hard for me.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. I've definitely experienced all those, I guess you would call them microaggressions. I think that's what we call them now. And but I always go back to that lived experience thing, and what why they're reacting that way. They're reacting that way because, well, you're a doctor, and so doctors are seen as being somewhat prestigious, or maybe having some sort of power, or things
Invincible.
like
Or
things like
zooming
that,
around. Yes,
right?
I don't know.
And,
Right.
and so when they see you in that situation, I think maybe they're just taken aback, like
Yeah.
they've seen you as this person, and then you're
Mm,
not that person at that
mm.
moment, and it might be a shocking thing, I think.
Yeah, I never was. I never did get to where I could master that in my own mind.
Right.
But I tell you, it's back to what you said. You know, if you live long enough, you're going to have something visit you
Yep.
where you suddenly have an appreciation for accessibility and, you know, the kindness of others
Yeah.
and your own strengths and all the good thing, bad thing part of your own story, right?
Yeah. And I also think it goes back to we're taught to be individuals and we're taught to be tough and but really we all need help at some point. Everyone who takes their car to get their oil changed needs help. Everyone who takes their car to the mechanic needs help. Everyone who calls a plumber needs help. So we all need help. It's just certain situations where you have to ask for help that isn't your everyday type of help, I think really bothers us because we're taught to be individuals and we're taught to take care of ourselves and I think it can sometimes be hard to do that.
Yeah. Well, I do have to share that there was this whole world of people that suddenly were super helpful. And it was, you know, the good far outweighed the bad through all that chapter of my life for sure. There was so much kindness and so much, you know, just nuanced things that little people might do or other people that were doing in the same situation as I was would help each other, and it was so great. So now that we've kind of covered the landscape of your life and the things that you're obviously uniquely built to contribute to all our lives, anybody who stumbles on you is going to be inspired, and you're going to help us raise our game with the insights that you share. You know, I'm sure though you're just a person like I am who looks at the negative news and goes, "Oh my god." You know, like what? We can't celebrate one darn good thing happening in the world. I'm sure sometimes you have this thought like, "Ugh, I really wish people knew what." What has life taught you that you really wish people knew?
I think that the big thing is that if we all work together, we can accomplish big things, and that we all can play a part in making the world better. And so I'm doing my little thing with trails or little things here and there to make the world better for people with disabilities. But we all can do something, and if we all do one little thing, it becomes a giant thing. And it's the same with trails. If we all fix one little thing on a trail, then we can fix a giant trail. So I think really if you apply that to anything in life, it could make the world a lot better place.
It is so true. I believe there's something that we are each uniquely built to contribute. And the quicker in life that we find that, and the longer we try by doing nice, good things, the better world it is for everybody. So, Enoch, share with us what people can do next, because this is really important. You can't go through a nice interview like this without telling us how we can help or what really needs to happen next that we can influence.
So as far as people with disabilities, there's a lot of things you can do. You can volunteer for your local adaptive organization. You can volunteer for different organizations such as the Red Cross and different other helpful organizations. You can set up fundraisers for these organizations. So
Mm,
that's a big thing. Uh, I'm actually in the development area for Maine Adaptive also, and so funding is a huge thing to
funding
make
is huge.
all of this happen. Adaptive equipment is very expensive. So, for instance, a hand cycle can be $10,000 to $30,000. So money goes a long way toward getting
Uh
all this
huh.
programming off the ground and getting
Right.
people outdoors. So that can be a huge factor.
You know, I imagine too. You and I are from the Northeast. I'm in Vermont. We have the Missisquoi Wildlife Refuge here near us. I imagine anybody who has an outdoor bent at all can volunteer at at the state parks or the refuges around us and volunteer as a guide or a docent or a trail maintenance person.
Yeah, a lot of the land trusts, or actually all the land trusts I work with really have volunteer days where they go out and clean up trails, or they do maintenance, or they
Mm-hmm.
build bridges,
Mm-hmm.
and you can do story walks and all these different things that can get people outdoors. So
Mm,
yeah, volunteering is a huge thing.
How about you personally? Can people get out the word that you do this kind of public speaking?
Yeah, so if you go to my website, enochglidden.com, I have a page on there where you can request for me to speak, or
Okay, great.
I have different videos on there, and I have lots of information about trails, and I write a blog about all my adventures. So I've written blogs about traveling around the country and all my sports and climbing on Capitan and all that, all the things I've done. So
Great.
you can follow everything I do there.
Great, great, great. Okay, well, I can't thank you enough for sharing your insight with us. And, how can I? We just got to leave people with those three words. Next time you want to say, "Oh, I just can't." Better question is, how can I? So thank you, Enoch Glidden. I hope the terrific conversation that you just listened to will help you have a spring in your step this week, and maybe you're going to rid yourself of some limiting belief and do some extraordinary thing that brings you no end to joy and wonder. Okay, Enoch, have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.